Texans training camp gets going this week. We got to finish up our discussion on the depth that the Texans have. We know the starters in depth will hit the field later this week, but we've got to hit the wheel of depth to finish up our discussion about some of these depth pieces that the Texans have. Can those players make the roster? How can they impact the team once they make the roster? Let's get the wheel spinning and find out who we're talking about. We start with Tim Settle, one of the bigger defensive tackles that the Texans have. He is a large individual, and I believe Settle is not only going to make this team, but there's a good chance that he is one of the starting defensive tackles. Now, starting defensive tackle carries a little bit different element to it than, say, last year when Sheldon Rankins and Malik Collins were the unquestioned starting defensive tackles for this Texans team. I do believe the Texans are going to heavily rotate their defensive tackles based on the situations that they're going to experience. So if it's a run-heavy situation, maybe Settle and Foley Fadukasi are the defensive tackles. It's more of a pass rush situation. Maybe you get a little bit of Settle, but you put Khalil Davis in there if he makes the team, or Davis and Kurt Heinisch are the defensive tackles. So I think there's going to be a lot of mixing and matching, and Settle should absolutely be a part of that mixing and matching. Played in Buffalo before he ended up here in Houston. Not a super heavy investment financially, so if guys outplay him, then, well, Tim Settle's not going to make the team. But I believe Settle, with his size and experience, is going to be on this team and going to be a depth piece for this Houston Texans along the defensive tackle situation. So we spin again to find out what's next for us on the wheel of depth. And we stick on the defensive line with Solomon Byrd, the rookie from USC. 24 years old, I believe. Solomon Byrd played defensive end for USC, is a longer guy with a little bit of explosion to him. It's not going to be easy for Byrd to make the team, but he certainly has an opportunity to be a practice squad type player for the Houston Texans. D'Amico Ryans and Nick Caserio went with some younger guys early on in the draft, and then later in the draft, they went with guys that have played a lot of football. And if Byrd can go in there, be bendy on the edge, showcase some of the explosiveness that he showed a time or two at USC, and just use some of his grown man strength. I mean, again, he's got a wife, he's got a family, as Nick Caserio noted in the post-draft press conference. He is a man. This is not a kid finishing up college. He is a man, so you should see maybe physically a little bit more out of him than, say, your typical 21-year-old because of his age and how much football he's played as a big experience element for him as well. Again, won't be easy for Byrd to make the team. There's a lot of established talent at the defensive end spot already. Obviously, we know about Will Anderson and Daniel Hunter and Danico Autry as the top three, but Jerry Hughes as a veteran who's been around the block. Derek Barnett, who's played a little bit in the NFL and played for the Texans last year. We'll talk about Dylan Horton here in this video. It's not going to be easy for Byrd. His goal, show up, get the coaches to notice you a couple times, hang around on the practice squad should that opportunity present itself in the future for you. The wheel is getting smaller and smaller with these names. Now, Steven Sims is a really fun name to talk about. Sims absolutely has a chance to make this team as one of the 6 wide receivers I believe the Texans are going to keep. I believe they're going to keep 6 because you need special teams guys, and you just want to have that little bit of extra room in case somebody's dinged up during the week, needs a couple of snaps off because they get the bell rung a little bit, something like that. And Sims, one of the only great moments from the Ravens playoff game was his special teams usefulness. Punt returns, kick returns. Obviously, the kick return rule is different this year. Sims hasn't showcased a ton from a wide receiver standpoint. And, in fact, there were times last year where the Texans were kind of short on wide receivers and weren't putting Sims on the roster from the practice squad and putting him out there. So there needs to be a little bit more growth from Sims at the wide receiver spot, showcase that he can do a little bit more from a wide receiver standpoint, but also be a special teams difference maker. If Sims does that, he's certainly going to be on this team as one of the 6 wide receivers that I believe the Texans are going to keep. Kickoffs, punt returns, and to have a guy on the depth chart, if you can trust him on special teams, okay? You can trust Steven Sims on special teams and not have to worry about a starter, like, say, Tank Dell, being a special teams player, that gives you a lot more peace of mind overall with your team if a guy like Sims can go out there and carve himself out a special teams role and then be a depth piece when it comes to the wide receiver position as well. He will be one of the wide receivers that you got to keep a close eye on throughout the course of training camp. And with that extra preseason game and with the preseason games as a whole, he's going to play a lot as well. So if he can showcase all the elements of what the Texans need out of the wide receiver spot and do good on special teams, Steven Sims could definitely be on this Texans team. The wheel spins with just 6 names left on it, and this one is a special teams ace, Neville Hewitt, who has been with the Texans since 2021, actually. He's one of the additions by Nick Caserio to come in and fill out the roster initially, but ultimately Hewitt continued to carve himself out a role on special teams. I expect that to continue to be the case for Neville Hewitt. He is a special teams ace that is actually really good at special teams. If you watch the last video, which is in the link in the description down below, you know how much I value special teams players that are considered special teams aces that are actually good at special teams. He is a big physical presence on special teams. He's fast. He gets going. He's violent. And I have to imagine that Frank Ross will have a way to use Neville Hewitt and execute with him on special teams on the new kickoff rule. Guys like Hewitt, who have a lot of special teams experience in a variety of ways, will be super valuable early on as everybody kind of learns and tries to understand the new kickoff rule for the NFL. So Hewitt, I believe, is going to be on the team, a depth piece. And I guess if you had to put him on the field at linebacker, he's played some linebacker in his time with the Texans. But ultimately, this guy's here for the special teams prowess, and I believe he's going to be here as the ace on special teams for this team. So special teams kind of a starting unit if kickoffs are going to go the way that I believe kickoffs are going to go. So Hewitt, a starter on special teams, so to speak. The wheel continues to dwindle in names, but we've got to get to all of them in the conversation about depth. We stick at the linebacker spot and Jake Hansen. Hansen actually surprisingly made the team a couple of years ago and has hung around here at the linebacker spot. Made it with Lovie Smith as the coach, stuck around, was on the team last year. And the Texans haven't played him a ton, but Hansen has been around and been in the mix, and he's going to stay in the mix when it comes to this linebacking room and the linebacker situation. I mean, you look at what the linebacking room looks like after Azeez Al-Shaair and Christian Harris, the top 2 linebackers. It's anybody's game. It could be rookie Jamal Hill. It could be Henry To'o in his second year. It could be a guy like Jake Hansen. He's not the biggest. He's not the strongest. He's not the fastest. But, hey, he's got a year under his belt in this defense. And maybe with that, he's able to stave off some of those names that got added who are newer players to the team, like someone like Jacob Phillips or even maybe Jamal Hill. Look, Hill's a late-round draft pick, and I know there's some stuff to be excited about in his skill set, but there's no guarantee that a late-round draft pick is making a team like the Texans, although, you don't want to give up on draft picks. Hansen's not going to have an easy route to a roster spot, and maybe he's hanging around as a practice squad player because he's familiar with the team. I don't know that he's the type of player that immediately goes somewhere else and can make the 53-man roster, but Hansen is a guy that has a lot of work to do, will play a lot in the preseason games, and if he can carve out one of those final spots on the roster, it's because they trust him. Should he get on the field from a depth standpoint, he can play a little special teams for the Texans. And if they don't get him on the active roster, he's certainly a guy that can be a practice squad candidate as well. The wheel is down to 4. Dylan Horton is our next name on the wheel. Horton is a really tough player to predict and understand what he's going to bring to the table because we don't know if he's going to be back and ready for football activities. If he's going to be back practicing with the team on the field for training camp, is he going to be on the physically unable to perform list or the non-football injury list? Coming back from the cancer situation that he dealt with, look, he's on the mend. Nick Caserio mentioned in the spring that Horton has been working to get back to football activities. I don't know if that's going to be in July or August or October or December or in 2025. I don't know when he's going to be able to get back to football activities. But if he's ready to go from day one of training camp, this is a guy that has an opportunity to carve out the 4th, 5th spot at defensive end. And maybe even if Danico Autry plays a little bit more defensive tackle, maybe even Horton could find himself as high as 3rd on the depth chart when it comes to defensive end. He didn't have a ton that you can remember from last season where he did play before he missed the rest of the year dealing with his cancer diagnosis. It's not a lot that you can remember and say, hey, well, Horton looked really good here, really good. But having the experience, having played a little bit in the NFL, and if he gets his body back to where it was when maybe he was healthy playing football, because there's a thought that maybe even as much as a year ago, he was still dealing with this stuff and maybe didn't know about it a year ago. So we might see the best physical version of Dylan Horton down the road. I just don't know if we're going to see it at the beginning of training camp here in 2024. So he's a tough player to kind of predict, but if he is able to physically go from the jump, he'll be battling with the guys like Derek Barnett and Jerry Hughes for that depth spot along the defensive end part of the depth chart. And Horton, a former 4th round pick, I have a hard time seeing, if he's healthy and ready to play, that I have a hard time seeing him not make the team and end up as an option for this defensive line that likes to play a lot of players over the course of a season. 3 names, 3 intriguing individuals, and Tegan Quateriano is next up for us. Quateriano, I frankly don't know how he's making the team. I mean, he's not making the team over Dalton Schultz and Brevin Jordan and Cade Stover. So he's fighting for the team to keep a 4th tight end, I guess. I mean, maybe if an injury to Brevin Jordan or Cade Stover, God forbid Dalton Schultz popped up, Tegan Quateriano would have himself an opportunity. But Quateriano himself has got to stay healthy. I mean, he's had his career drastically affected by injuries. He cannot stay healthy. He's missed training camps. He's missed off-season workouts, and he's missed portions of seasons because of injuries. He's got to stay healthy if he has any chance, any shot at making this team. Quateriano has to be able to be on the field and execute. And I wonder how much he's behind a guy like Brevin Jordan and Dalton Schultz because he didn't play as much last year. We know Cade Stover's not going anywhere as a 4th round pick, so I just don't see the route for Tegan Quateriano to make this team. And a year ago, heading into training camp, coming out of some OTAs and mini camp conversations, I was excited to see if Quateriano could play to his size, showcase some of his athleticism, and there was a moment here or there, but the guy just can't stay healthy, can't stay on the field, and if that can't happen, then you can't make the team if you're Tegan Quateriano. 2 names left, 1 on offense, 1 on defense, and we will start with we will get close to the finish here with the offensive player. JaMarr Jordan, the rookie running back out of Louisville. He has a chance to be the number 2 running back on this team. Jordan is a player that has experience with a zone scheme. He showcased his vision at Louisville to where the scouting report that Dane Brugler from The Athletic put out for him in his draft profile is he'll consistently hit doubles and triples until ultimately he hits that home run for your team. A guy that is productive, can see the holes that the offensive line is going to open up, and just give you a solid base as a player with high-end potential because he has the chance to hit some of those home runs. And JaMarr Jordan has been very outspoken that his workouts in the draft process are not anywhere near as much as what he can put on the table. He ran a little bit of a slower 40 than he wanted. He explained that he was still recovering from an injury this past season, which is why he ran that slow 40. Well, if he showcases some speed and vision, he's absolutely got a role on this team, and he could find himself as high on the depth chart as number 2 behind Joe Mixon. Plus, there's special teams usefulness to JaMarr Jordan. It's 2 kickoff returns for touchdowns in his college career and his college resume, and the kickoff rule is different this year. So maybe a guy like Jordan is back there on the depth chart showcasing some of his speed. So even if Dameon Pierce gets it going and is running back 2, and say they keep Dare Ogunbowale as sort of that specialty running back running back 3. Jordan could make the team as running back 4/special teams and be a useful player for this team. But I would be surprised if we don't see some fun moments in training camp from JaMarr Jordan, the running back out of Louisville, the rookie that the Texans drafted this past draft. And I will be excited to watch him sort of figure out exactly his role, get in tune with the NFL, and showcase some of that vision that got him as a much ballyhooed and highly touted prospect from time to time. Certainly as a late round prospect. Some of the other running backs went off the board. It was a less talented overall running back group in the draft this year. But Jordan was touted as one of those guys that has a little bit of something amongst the late round names. So he has a chance here for the Texans to showcase that. There is just one name left on the wheel of depth, and that is DAngelo Ross, the cornerback. And the last time you saw DAngelo Ross, or really noticed DAngelo Ross, was probably him getting smoked out on the field. I believe it was Cleveland where he ended up on the field, and I think it was Amari Cooper got him pretty bad. Ross is a depth player who's been around the organization for a while now. That's all he really is. He's kind of bounced between, back of the roster, maybe practice squad type level guy, and that's kind of where he is right now. Look, there's a lot of defensive backs on this team. They've got to figure out exactly how many they want who are outside guys, inside guys, versatility going back and forth. A player like Miles Bryant might be able to push DAngelo Ross off the roster because Bryant can play inside and maybe helps on special teams. Ross is going to have to be good on special teams as a depth player. I don't have super high hopes for him, but experience with the team is always a plus when you're trying to beat out guys who are brand new to the team. So Ross has a tough path to making the team and making the roster. But it's not impossible. That's why you have training camp, and he's going to play a lot in the preseason. He's going to play a lot in training camp, and he'll have opportunities to showcase that he's built on something, but I just don't see it for DAngelo Ross quite yet for the Texans, and don't know that it's going to pop up here in 2024 for him. That's it. We've gone through almost all of the depth players for this team. I say almost all of them because there's some players competing for starting spots that I didn't include in the wheel of depth at any time, like Jeff Okudah, CJ Henderson. We'll talk about them. Don't worry about that conversation. That's going to come your way here as training camp gets going. And then obviously starters didn't get involved in the wheel of depth. The wheel will return sometime soon with a different purpose than picking the wheel of depth players for us. But for now, the wheel is done. What'd you think about the depth conversation amongst these players? Is JaMarr Jordan RB2 for this Texans team? Do they have something with Dylan Horton if he can make the team? Is Tim Settle going to settle into that defensive tackle spot? Pun intended, yes. Let me know in the comment section down below. On your way down there, throw me a thumbs up on the channel. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Training camp right around the corner. You don't want to miss any of the training camp fun, okay? So subscribe, hit the little bell so you know are notified when new stuff pops up here on the channel. And I ultimately just appreciate you watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I can't wait till we talk Texans again soon.